Welcome to episode 16 of Radio Omnicor. I'm your host, Colleen McClintock, and you're listening to the show that is guaranteed to teach you something useful and introduce you to an interesting and dynamic guest. In studio today, we welcome Dr. Hilton Rudnick, our very own MD, and Kevin Distiller, who is the MD of Odyssey. He has worked in the talent identification industry for over 15 years. He's a registered industrial psychologist and holds an MBA with an impressive contribution to the industry. He is a member of the PAI committee and the steering committee of the ATP, and he also presents regularly at conferences. Today we are taking on the thorny issue of gamification within the psychometric industry. So welcome, Kevin. It's really a thrill to have you in the studio.
Yeah, thanks. It's actually quite fun being here.
Welcome, Hilton.
Thank you.
Back in your usual chair over there.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we just start off, maybe Kevin, giving us a bit of an introduction, to yourself and your career and what brings you to gamification. I'm so fascinated with where you've landed up.
Yeah, it's a very interesting journey, and you never know where it's going to take you. So when you say, who am I and where do I come from, what comes to mind first and foremost is the bigger stuff. So being a father, being a husband, those sorts of things. But I've been an industrial psychologist for probably about 15 years, I think, more or less. And I come from quite an academic background. So my family, I'm kind of the least educated in my family, which is quite interesting. And I think for me, it was always a case of I started very young. As soon as I finished my internship, I kind of knew I never wanted to work in a corporate. So I started out on my own. I started a business as I finished my internship. And I think from that, I kind of was driven to always try network, always try be at the forefront, always try be aware of what was changing, because I had to have a way to stay relevant. And because of that, I've done I've done lots of conferencing. I've been involved in organizations like SOPSA, currently ATP, PI, trying to stay at the forefront of what's happening. And I've always tried to dabble in the new and the grey. So in our space, the technology and how that has sort of influenced the assessment space, I'd like to think that myself and my partner in the Latitude 26 days went a long way towards always trying new things and always bringing new things to our clients and trying to be at the forefront of everything. And I think that's what kind of brought me to the gamification space, is that it's a bit of a buzzword out there at the moment, but it's a really exciting space to be. And when the opportunity arose kind of towards the end of last year, it was a big decision to dabble in the space, but I've really enjoyed the journey to now, yeah.
So, maybe just for a little bit of context for the listeners, we're talking about the gamification of psychometric assessments, which has traditionally been a very conservative space and a highly regulated space. And maybe, Kevin, you can just talk about the kind of principles of gamifying something that was done in such a traditional way previously.
Yeah. So, thanks, Hilton. You're right. Gamification, it's what I've come to realize is all it really is taking elements of games that people play that have been around for centuries, from Roman times, and that engage people, and taking a layering of gaming and putting it over whatever it may be, whether it's an engagement process, whether it's a client survey, whether it's a change management process, vitality with discovery. It's just a way to engage people. And where it's kind of started to play in our space here, it's almost when you do a lit review, what you realize is they talk about the evolution of assessments, going from the traditional space you're talking about to in about the early 2000s, where it went from paper and pencil to online.
Right.
And nothing's really changed since then until the last couple of years, where with AI and with, I suppose, competition out there and a new generation in the market that needs to be brought in and that needs to be accounted for, a lot of companies started dabbling with taking the gamified elements and layering it onto assessments. What we've tried to do at Odyssey is we've tried to use various ways. So when I talk about that, you get the fully fledged game. That's called game-based assessments, where you literally have a game that someone plays and you track what they do instead of asking them the question. Right. And then you get gamified assessments, which is where you just layer a gaming element, a cover story over a traditional assessment process. Mm-hmm. And we've tried to use a bit of both to maintain the rigor, but also be engaging and relevant to the new generation out there.
So it's kind of like the Uberfication in a way of assessments, because it's really disrupting the industry. How do you explain or put people's mind at rest that this is still scientific? How much validation has been done? It can have a bit of that hype that's surrounded. Is it hard for you to get people to buy into it?
So your point is very valid, because when I take a look at what's happening internationally, my sense is, and obviously this is a bit of a generalization, but there's the technology and the gaming elements is way ahead of the science to me. So the front end looks incredible. And I think in markets which are less rigorous to ours, we have a very rigorous market in our country for various reasons, and we've got a very strong legislative framework. I think internationally you can get away with a little bit more fuzz. And I think you're right that it is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, and a lot of what's out there looks incredible and on the front end is very engaging and does amazing things. But when you look at the psychometric properties and the science that's available, it doesn't really stack up to what we would want to see. It doesn't mean it's not there. I just think the science is behind a little bit at the moment. And there's actually a big debate in the market right now around how the FBA guidelines apply to gamified assessments, because you're gathering data in a completely different way. And I think we all have to just navigate in the grey a little bit. What we've done at Odyssey is try to maintain the psychometric properties behind the games that we play. So as I say, we have some gamified assessments or game-based assessments. Most of what we do is the gaming element. So you engage people with a bit more of a playful element to what you're doing, but in essence, you're still gathering the same sort of data you always used to gather. My sense is that's the best and most responsible way to use gamification at the moment in the assessment space. But I've got no doubt that very, very soon the games are going to come, and we're going to have to find a way to know that what we're assessing stands up to the rigors of our legislative framework. Mm.
I mean, it's an interesting environment that we're in South Africa, highly regulated. I suspect the most highly regulated psychometric place in the world. I don't know. I can't say that with full authority. But, one way or another, when we're putting tests into the market, we have to be sure that we're testing responsibly. We have to be sure that the test that we're doing is going to measure the things that you're saying that it measures. With the kind of stuff that you're doing, one way or another, there's got to be an audit trail or something that you can validate, right? Yeah. So there's an Excel spreadsheet that's got data that you can measure, that you can do a factor analysis. How do you get to that?
So the way we do it is the traditional way. So we gather in everything that's being done by the candidate is being recorded in the back end. We know everything from when people enter the system, when they leave the system, what they do in the background. It's actually been quite amazing for me to see, because it's the first time I've actually played in a test development phase. And I can't believe how much we can get when a candidate has an issue and I go to the developers and we look into the back end. We can get everything that happened. So you can gather all that information. And I think for me, where you're getting at with the factor analysis, that's the traditional way, and we're still using that now. I really believe that as AI develops, in fact, the AI technology is probably already there. We just haven't learned to use it enough. But I think that's when you're going to get the real power of probably psychometrics in general, but definitely in the gamified space. Because when you look internationally, what they say is you gather everything being done in the game. So they talk about a 10-minute game getting 10,000 data points. Sure. The only way you can analyze that properly, I think, is through AI. I don't think traditional analysis and statistical techniques will give you what you're looking for in that space. I think we're a little bit away from that now. The technology is there. We just have to work out how to use it. And I'm hoping that at Odyssey we'll kind of move to that space.
So, are we still looking at traditional things like a reliability measure? We're still saying this test has a Cronbach alpha of 0.9. We know it's consistent. Or are we using some other measurement?
So that's the debate in the market at the moment. What we're doing at Odyssey is we're sticking with the Cronbach alphas at this stage, and we're actually using the FBA guidelines. We've got a very strong FBA document that we've put together. Even though what we're looking at is skills, we want to know that what we're doing is valid, reliable, unbiased, everything that sits in our labor legislation. However, when you look internationally, the debate is there, whether that is still relevant in a gamified assessment context. And I think that there's some very bright academics that are trying to work out, they're navigating the solution to this. We're not there yet, but I'm quite confident we'll get there because the debates are happening. There was actually a debate in Pretoria about a month ago, a PI-sponsored event where that was on the agenda. But what became clear to me, listening to these people, these experts speaking, is that it's early days. I don't think the profession knows yet how to deal with this.
Right.
And how would the HPCSA comment on sort of recruitment choices around gamification?
I think the HPCSA would stick with what they would always say. They are, for obvious reasons, they have to be very careful, very traditional, very conservative in their approach because of their mandate. So this is something that people using gamified assessments have to be very aware of. And for now, you have to be comfortable playing in the grey a little bit. But I think the safest option, specifically if you're looking at high-stakes assessments, is to rather use the gamified process where you layer in gaming elements over traditional assessment so that you can maintain the rigor we're used to. I think if you move into the game-based process, so you play a game and you track what's happening, I think that's where you could get yourself into a bit of trouble because the framework's not there yet, and I think the HPCSA won't be comfortable moving outside of what they traditionally do.
I mean, if we're preparing for the future, I guess companies like yours should be almost lobbying the HPCSA or being involved, at least connecting with them to kind of lay the groundwork for what's coming, because it's, one way or another it's coming. Everybody knows that. But, we're going to have to at least lay down some framework so that they at least are prepared for it. Right?
Absolutely. And that's why I try to get involved in those bodies, is to have a voice in those, to lobby in those areas. I can tell you that the Association of Test Publishers and PI and Psycha are having these debates at the moment, and the HPCSA, I'm pretty sure, will get involved in them. I think it's inevitable that it's going to happen. But to your point, I do think there's going to be a period of time where we're going to have to play in the grey, because what's going to happen is the market's going to, it is already demanding a specific type of solution, especially when they're looking at the generations, trying to appeal to the new generations, the Generation Zs out there, and trying to get them to apply and go through an assessment process by choice. This is what's happening internationally, and already some of our clients here are being spoken to by their counterparts internationally, being pushed to use gamified assessments that are best practice, but they don't fit into our legislative framework yet.
And also it brings to mind who gets left out in terms of fairness in our context, because I know there is even the psychometric assessments could be, have problems with the government and that kind of stuff. So if I've not had access to any of these things, is it a disadvantage for me when I'm doing an assessment with that layer that you speak of?
So I believe you're right. Especially because a lot of these assessments they're westernized and they have a very Western feel, partly in the scenario that's been set out. So some of the best practice, big sort of flagship assessments that are gamified are in theme parks or are in sushi restaurants, which I don't think a typical South African coming from a rural environment or having a bit of a socioeconomic disadvantage would necessarily feel that they understand what that's all about or that will resonate with their life experience. I also think a lot of these games demand quite high data because they're proper games. Right. And the last thing I'd say is where I agree with you. I know the research being done internationally says it makes no difference what age you are, what race you are, what gender you are. But I think, again, that's in an environment where it's highly digitized and it's got quite a maturity in that space. The research hasn't been done here, but my sense is exactly that if you bring those games in, you would disadvantage people that are already disadvantaged. So at Odyssey, what we've tried to do is create games that speak to the average South African wherever they come from. So the games are based in supermarkets, they're based in restaurants, it's environments people understand. We've also tried to make sure that we don't use too much data, so that someone sitting in Karankura that needs to take a bus to an internet cafe, it's not going to cost them too much money to then spend a bit of money and get onto that internet and complete the assessment. In fact, what we've tried to do, it's part of our mission, is to open up an opportunity for people that normally wouldn't get that opportunity. So to your point, the people that maybe don't have the education that's required to get through traditional assessment processes, and that would feel a bit of test anxiety. We've also created an adaptive process in our assessment. So as soon as you start to find it difficult, it'll cut you out that assessment. So the person doing it, the idea is they won't feel the test anxiety, because as soon as it becomes difficult, the test ends. And in their mind, it was easy. They got through what they got through. So we've tried to counteract it in that way. What I'm finding is there is a bit of a challenge from a logistical point of view. We need to find a way to create ways for people in the outlying areas to get access to the internet. Having it available on smartphones and tablets works to a degree, but we haven't totally ironed that process out yet.
I mean, maybe just to get some context, what are the types of tests that you've gamified up until now?
So we've stuck with skills because we believe that skills are it's the easiest way to make sure what you're doing is valid, reliable, and unbiased.
So literacy, numeracy,
numeracy, detail orientation, basic problem solving, those sorts of constructs. Whilst you can, when you look at, there's a lot of people doing personality and integrity and those sorts of constructs internationally, we find it really difficult to understand how you do that in a valid, reliable way, because you're not... You watch what someone does. So the idea is you don't say to someone, how resilient are you? You give them a really difficult test and see how long they take before they give up. And you say the person that took longer is resilient. It's that sort of...
It's a bit of a leap of faith.
It's a lot of inferencing in a way.
It's a bit of inferencing. This is where I think the AI will catch up in time, and we'll get to the point where we can do personality in that way. But I believe at the moment, those psychological constructs are probably best left alone until we know that we can reliably and validly assess them in a gamified context.
I mean, anyone who's watched like something like Westworld, where you kind of see, AI way into the future, would imagine that like role plays in the future are just going to be a kind of completely AI construct, that you're going to be having a conversation with some kind of adaptive form of intelligence that will be able to guide you. You won't need people to do it. Is that the future that you see?
It is. In fact, it's already here. If you look at my sister company, Everlex, they've got 2 AI-based assessment centers that they run. So one is it's a problem-solving scenario where you get given a very specific business problem. You write questions into a computer, and it gives you answers based on your questions. So it's very AI-driven. And the other one is a digital conversation, where it's a similar idea. You having a WhatsApp conversation with an employee, and as you decide what to send the computer, it gives you responses. So it's already there. It's already happening. We know of those 2, and I'm sure there's others out there. I agree with you that I think it's going to just get more and more complex and more scientific as time goes by. But I've got no doubt that that's where it's going to go.
Yeah, okay.
So just to get a bit maybe a little lighter, it's quite intense, the conversation. What's the kind of books and stuff that keeps you busy? What are you reading at the moment?
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. I've been reading quite a few things. I do quite a lot of reading. A book that I just finished reading that's actually a fantastic book. It's called Deep Work. I don't know the sort of subface. Yeah. And it's by Carl Newport. I really found it a fantastic book because what he really talks about is knowledge work. And he talks about how knowledge workers can get very busy without really being very productive, because there's lots of emails and there's lots of demands on your time. And before you know it, your day can disappear. And he talks about how he gives you strategies. First, he talks about the neurology of why it's important to create space for deep work if you want to be productive. And then he gives strategies to kind of get there. And it's a fantastic book. Outside of that, I read quite a lot of science fiction, a lot of fantasy. So it really just depends on what kind of gets me at the moment. So I'm now I've just started a Ken Follett book that sounds quite interesting. It's about it seems like it's got something to do with mining in Scotland in the in like the 1700s. So I've just started that, and it sounds like a lot of fun.
So what impresses me so much about you is how you've kept yourself relevant, and you working in the leading edge of your industry. Where do you see it going in the next 5-10 years? Do you think traditional assessments will die, just like videos did?
It's an interesting question. I definitely think that AI is going to play a much bigger role. But for me, it's going to be more in the space of 2 things. One is allowing us to gamify more, because then you'll be able to use more complex algorithms that a human can't do on their own. and that'll open up a lot of possibilities in terms of what you're able to do with your assessment process. And I think where we'll start to get to is I don't think assessments will die out. I think they'll remain, but the role of us as practitioners, I think, is going to change. So I think whereas now, and it's already started to change, but traditionally what a lot of us spend our time doing is assessing people, role-playing and writing reports. And I really believe what's going to start to happen is the computers are going to do that, and we are going to spend our time providing proper value to our clients in using the AI capability to come up with big data and to come up with trends analysis and things that guide our clients in terms of where they need to move to from a talent point of view. And I think that we'll also be doing a lot more in terms of advising on how to best use this stuff in an ethical way. So really adding value and letting the computer do the number crunching that you don't really need to be doing. There's just no other way to do it at this point.
The idea about gamification also intrigues me in some way. So, if you take something like numeracy, right? You could ask someone 24 questions at different levels of numeracy and get a good view of kind of where they're positioned on the scale. If you gamify that and you make it sexier and it's got a brilliant front end and it looks funky, is that necessarily better? You're going to get to the same answer. Why go through that pain if you can do it so easily in a traditional way?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting question that you asked me, Hilton. It's a debate I had with my brother. He's an academic at UCT. He's a statistician. Wow. And his question to me when I told him that I'm in the gamified space is he said to me, sorry, I don't know if this is a dwarf question, but why gamify something? Because if someone has to do it anyway, what difference does it make? And I think it's a really good question because it's a very sexy concept. But I think for everyone out there, you've got to start asking yourself, why are you gamifying? For what purpose? And I think that there are times that making it sexier and more engaging will add a lot of value. That's specifically when you're doing like a graduate recruitment process where people are choosing to go through the process. And if your competitor is gamifying it and making it fun and you're not, you might find that the best candidates kind of go, I'm not so interested in this company, they're not a lot of fun, I'm going to go elsewhere. The other place where it adds a lot of value, I think, is when you're trying to differentiate yourself from your competitors. So you're trying to attract a certain type of talent and you want them to come to you and see you as a place to be. And the third place for me is if you look at a really great example is L'Oreal have this game that they've put out there. And I can't remember what it's called. It's called Reveal. Mm-hmm. And the concept there is you go and you play this game because it's a different industry to what is normally out there. And the game does a few things. It introduces you to the industry. So through playing the game, you get to learn about the cosmetics industry. And then they give you various elements in their business. So you get to play around and see all the various sides of what fits in a L'Oreal business case. And then the candidates that do the best in the game get sent to their headhunters. You say, this person seems like a great candidate, let's headhunt them. Mm-hmm. So it works really well in that sort of environment. I think in a traditional recruitment process, I tend to agree with you. I think it's more about just feeling that you're relevant, feeling that you're sexy, but not necessarily adding much value to what's out there at the moment.
So I consulted Yusuf Mullah, our CIO, just what questions would he be interested in asking. And he wanted me to ask you, how do you validate that someone isn't cheating? What if my clever cousin is doing it for me?
So it's a really good question. It's a question that I think it doesn't just sit in the gamified space. I think it sits with online assessments as well. And it's a space where there's a lot kind of out there. When you look at the research that's been done, it says that people don't cheat. That's the first thing. The other thing is quite often the question I'll ask people is if someone came into your office, do you check their ID? So they come in here in person, but do you really verify that it's the person that they are who they say they are? Some people do, some don't. I think for me, I've come to the conclusion that a percentage of people will probably cheat. I think a small percentage. If you put in honesty statements and that sort of thing, I think it decreases the number of cheating. I think the other thing is to get someone to do it on your behalf is a big ask because these things are difficult. They're not easy. You're putting people through quite a lengthy assessment and they're multifaceted. So just because someone is better than you at maths doesn't mean they're going to be a better fit than you to the role. And the last thing I'd say is for me, the role of these sorts of tools shouldn't be as a last resort. It should be a hurdle process where you have other elements built in afterwards. So, for example, if you want to whittle down a large number of candidates to a smaller number that you'll then interview, if you get a few false positives that get through, It shouldn't matter, because you should catch them out later on in the process when you interview them or do an assessment center or do something else once you've got a smaller number of select candidates to have your high-touch intervention. In my mind, this is when you're trying to take vast volumes of people that you can't get to in any other way, whittle them to a more manageable size. And I think that's where it'll work. But I think there'll always be a small percentage. In my mind, I'd say maybe about 10% of people that'll cheat in some form or other.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's a problem just in general, whatever mode of assessment you're using. I'm more worried about the false negatives than the false positives. So, to what extent can the technology just sometimes be a barrier? I mean, we know that like test exposure is a problem in the first place. Someone who's been tested multiple times gets a familiarity with it, but someone's got to play a game for the first time and has had no exposure to that. That could be even more daunting than doing some kind of linear assessment. I mean, what would be your sense of that?
I would agree with you. So this is my big question when I look at the game-based tests that are out there. That was my sense. There was one that I played recently just to explore it, a very well-known international assessment. And what struck me about it is it felt like Angry Birds. So I thought to myself, their research document says that it doesn't make a difference. You can play it for the first time, or you could have played a million games before. Age makes no difference. Education makes no difference. My sense was, I've played Angry Birds and I had a feel of what to do. My father hasn't. I suspect he wouldn't. So I guess the question is, what are you tracking in the background? Because if you're not tracking how well the person's doing in the game, but you're tracking how they approach the game, perhaps then it makes no difference. And that's where how we validate these tools and how we get our final result through them. That's where I think the AI plays a part, and where I think that's the grey we still have to kind of navigate through.
So how are you using your app with the market at the moment?
So we predominantly play in the space of entry-level workers, so people who have blue collar, the two places. Predominantly blue collar, so lots of pickers and packers and that sort of person, lots of learners. The learnership space is interesting because we're doing it in one of the big banks, and there the need was to open up the market to people who didn't normally have a chance. So we go through 4,000 assessments in 5 days around the country and get people out in the rural areas who would never normally get an opportunity to go through this process, and whittle them down into a smaller number. We use the traditional psychometric processes in doing it. So where you have validated, reliable ways of measuring skill, and then through that you can rank order people in a merit list based on what is being looked for in various learnerships. So the idea is someone might not be suited to learnership X, but might be suited to learnership Y, and we help the bank identify that. The pickers and packers is a fantastic case study. That was where we've had the biggest success in seeing a result in productivity, where the pickers and packers that have brought in through using Odyssey, they upskill much quicker and their productivity is much faster. So it's made a big difference to the client. The other space that we've started to play in is mass recruitment, because our system can handle huge volumes. Now, I never thought that was a challenge. I thought all systems could do that. And what I've learned in the last 7 months being involved in this business is you actually can't just assume that your platform is stable enough to handle huge volumes. So what we can do is we sometimes latch on to an interest in styles questionnaire that's traditional psychometric to get a behavioral feel, and then our skills that you can then rank order. And it works quite nicely when you're looking for graduates as well, because you can get to a large number of people relatively quickly. And then if you know what you're looking for in terms of styles, interests, behavior, and skills, you can, again, start to get a feel of which candidate is better suited where. And as I say, whittle those big numbers down. I'm working with a client at the moment. Their current process is 2,000 people. It takes them 7 weeks of interviewing. So they've got 3 trainers that spend 7 weeks just interviewing 2,000 people. And the concept is, with Odyssey, we're going to bring that down to a week. Those 2,000 will be assessed and validated in a week, and then they'll get their shortlist that they can then put through the traditional process.
So brilliant economies of scale. You know, when I look at the kind of complexity of the way games have evolved on the market, it's fascinating. I mean, watch these kind of point-and-shoot games with like complex war scenarios, and there's so many choices that you have. And in some way they mirror the real world, and you can see that there's opportunities to measure things like collaboration or aggression or strategy, because people are planning ahead, or creativity and doing those funky things. But there seems to separate the signal from the noise seems like the main challenge. I mean, there's so much going on, and people experiment in games. You don't mind dying and getting respawned, or trying a different mode of being, putting on a different skin. So it sounds like there can be a lot of opportunities to get things that are more noise than signal, and separating them out seems to me to be one of the challenges that you would face. I mean, is that true?
I would agree with you. Again, if you take a look at what's been said out there, some of the criticisms of gamified assessments is exactly that games are fun until they're not, until they're serious. And there's not so much fun anymore. And that's where, for me, it boils down to what's the purpose of the game? Why are you gamifying in the first place? And your choice of gamifying is really important. I think for me, the tendency is to say you don't gamify just to gamify. There has to be a reason, and it has to give you some value. So if, for example, you're doing it in a business school scenario and you want to create a more engaging way for a team to work together around different locations, then a games like that might be a nice way to do it. And you let them dabble and play over the course of the year, and you get to track what they do. But when it's in a recruitment scenario, I agree with you. I think there's a lot of noise out there. And that's where I think the way that we score what we're doing, the 10,000 data points that you hear people talking about, that's where I'm also uncertain of how they do that. And I must be honest, I haven't totally got my head around that yet. And that's where I think AI will play a big part. And I'm hoping we get to that crest of that journey. But I think we're not there yet.
Right.
So you speak a lot about, you have to play in the grey. Does that mean you kind of have to take a risk with your brand and with your ethics? Because what if one of those graduates got shortlisted, they got left out of that and took it to the CCMA? How would you explain how you excluded them?
So when I talk about playing in the grey, I talk about maintaining the spirit of the ethics of what we're doing. So you still have to know, specifically in our context, you have to know that what you're doing is valid, reliable, unbiased, as the Employment Equity Act demands. That has to be there. But the FBA guidelines and the way we traditionally validate these assessments, that doesn't necessarily fit with what we're doing. So when I talk about playing in the grey, I'm saying you need to have the spirit in mind, and you need to do what you can to be confident in yourself, that you're being ethical, etc. And that's also where I think the gamified process makes more sense right now, because you can maintain the traditional psychometric process. I think I agree. I mean, I agree with you. You just have to know that you've played that in your mind, and you have an answer for that. And I think you have to be comfortable in your own skin, that you're not doing anything that you can't sleep with as a professional in this environment. Playing in the grey for me is saying pushing the boundaries a little bit and being willing to try innovate. If you don't, you're never going to get this. You need to be willing to attempt and to push the boundaries as far as you can. But the spirit of what you're trying to achieve has to maintain.
Have there been any cases that you know of that have gone to CCMA?
So in our context as Odyssey, there's been one that I'm aware of, and it went the way of the client. So Odyssey stood up to the rigor of the CCMA scenario. But I think it's because, as I say, most of our games maintain the psychometric process. So although it's skills-based, we have the psychometric properties underpinning it. I think if you go straightforward game-based, I would be a little bit less comfortable at this point in time for those reasons. I think it's very difficult to be totally confident that if you're just doing a straightforward game, that it's going to be reliable and valid at this stage.
The process and the method for developing gamified assessments seems to be... So there's much higher cost in kind of building a game than you could just like scribbling out some items and piloting it and, getting the data. So, I mean, maybe, talk us through, like, how does it work? Do you guys sit around a room, around a table, dream up some idea, then you got to code it, or, how does it work, the process?
You're 100% right. So the process, if I look at, so I can't talk for anyone else. I can talk for Odyssey and the way we did it. So we started from a very scientific process. So where we began saying we wanted an assessment for entry level. That was the need. And we spent the first part doing the traditional things we would do as psychologists, and that was a job analysis. And it was a long process. It took the team about a year in terms of going to various clients and doing different things, from job analysis to process reengineering to interviews, to identify a core set of skills. that you need to be effective at entry levels, regardless of the context, whether it's in a call center, whether it's a picker or a packer, whether it's frontline sales, whether it's a security guard, just entry level work. What's the core skill you need to be able to enter the workforce? So that was the first tenet, is saying that we wanted to know that we're measuring something meaningful. And that was where the process began. So typical psychometric process.
So that's your constructs. Let's secure the construct we want to measure, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Once that was done, it was developing the games. And it developed as typical assessments, because that's what we've done previously. So it was sitting down and designing assessments as you would normally do it. And then it was sitting with our developers and with some very creative people in our team and starting to say, how do we gamify these? What can we gamify completely? What needs to just have a gaming element? And kind of playing around with that sort of process.
But there's a commitment right there, because now there's cost. Now you've got to code this thing on kind of a leap of faith, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. And that's what's really driven me to move into this team that I'm in now, is this innovative culture. This team has, from the very beginning, when things went online, they were at the forefront of doing it. When people were investing in systems, they were one of the first people to do it. The gamified process, they, I believe, one of the first people in South Africa to actually build it in the South African context. And they've always been willing to invest what they do in the innovation and in the development of what they're doing. And that's why I really believe the products that both Odyssey and Everlex have are really cutting edge, because the team are not scared to innovate, and they're not scared to invest, whether the market's ready for it or not.
So the cost is expensive. Is that reflected in the price, or, is it done like, let's build something that's expensive, but we're going to sell at low cost, because you're doing blue collar workers mostly, yeah?
Absolutely. So Odyssey is I believe it's very cost effective.
Affordable.
Absolutely. So there was a sunk cost in designing it. Now the system is there and it's developed. The ongoing cost is in maintaining the system and improving it, which we do on an ongoing basis. But that's a fixed cost, because we have the skills in-house to do that. In fact, we don't charge for customizations and for integrations and all that sort of thing. It's a value-added service. And we really have tried to add a fantastic service, but at a very affordable price.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think we've spoken a lot about, the potential risks and the leap of faith and the grey and all of that stuff. What are the possibilities? What excites you about this shift in the market?
I'm really excited about this journey. It's. I was talking to Hilton before we started about the risk I took in leaving where I was previously, which was a fantastic company, and moving across to Odyssey. And it really was because of the possibilities. I'm loving the fact that we're playing in a new space. I'm loving the fact that we're one of the first people in the country that are designing these games and that are playing in this new sort of theoretical framework. The possibilities are, I don't even know if we've even begun to touch the surface of them. For me, the possibilities with Odyssey at the moment is allowing people that haven't had access to the market to be able to show their talent. So you get these really talented people that don't have an opportunity, and I really believe we're starting to open up the market for those people. The process that Hilton's talking about, to be able to take long processes and shorten them, I think you're going to give people more value in the work that they do. And I believe the cost doesn't have to be high when you assess large numbers of people. So I'm hoping we open up what we've always done as psychologists to a bigger market. So it doesn't just have to be the blue-collar corporates that have the big budgets. It should be able to be your SME that can start to play in the space, because it shouldn't be expensive. It should be relatively easy to do. And then the last space for me is with the AI and the big data and the ability to really build strong algorithms that grow in themselves. I'd like to think that the possibilities of where we can go with this, we haven't even thought about yet. But the risks we're talking about, I'm hoping that we'll find ways through that, and we'll be able to design games that assess things we don't assess at the moment, and open up maybe constructs we haven't played with yet as psychologists. The neurology behind what we do. Right. We infer personality from the questionnaires we ask. We infer cognition from the way we problem solve. Perhaps there's a way that with AI, neuroscience and gamification, we'll start to play with constructs we haven't touched yet.
Or a DNA test that'll eliminate testing altogether. Yeah. The question that I was kind of interested in was, I think the psychometrists of the future, in 100 years' time, are going to look back to this as a kind of pioneering time, a pivot where things kind of shift around. I'm sure that they'll see the stuff that we're doing now as probably very quaint, and who knows. But in terms of I know it's early days, but in terms of the predictive validity, have you found that the tests that you're using are predicting a workforce that maybe more conventional tests couldn't have predicted?
So all I can look at there is where we had the stats.
Right.
And the example I spoke about with the pickers and the packers, that's been extremely successful.
Right, yeah. I mean, maybe go into a bit of detail about that, yeah.
Okay, so I don't have the stats at my fingertips. What I can say is when I looked at the research we had, it's actually in our technical manual, the productivity was significantly higher. I think it was, I stand to be corrected, but it was between 40 or 60% more productive bringing people in with Odyssey.
Right.
So what was happening previously is pickers would come on board and there's a process of learning how to pick. And it sounds like a simple job, but it's not. These warehouses are massive. So it's a couple of kilometers long. So for someone to get the right items into the basket at the right time, it's not as easy as it sounds. And through Odyssey, the client was able to identify people that could learn a lot quicker and have the detail orientation and the basic problem solving to get on the job much quicker and start picking faster. So it's created a more productive workforce that's achieving better results, lowering costs. You can get by with slightly less employees than you could before if that's the way you want to go. But you also now have a workforce that want to be promoted, and that's so you almost have a bit of a pipeline. At the moment, I'm interviewing clients to get a feel for what impact Odyssey's had in their world. And when I'm talking about clients, I'm not talking about the psychologist, I'm talking about the line manager. And the one person actually said to me that what she finds is before she used Odyssey, she would bring people in on the front line, the people that we always don't think you want to invest in, and then be pulled down to their level, having to train them and check them. And she was saying what she has now is a team of people where they are the next set of leaders. She was saying in her team of 11, she's already got 3 that she wants to promote.
So they can hit the ground running.
They hit the ground running, and it frees her up because she doesn't have to worry about what they're doing. And she said it's creating a pipeline.
Yeah, fabulous.
The other thing she said, which was a great quote for me, is she was saying to me, if you look at a casino, the person you interact with, your dealer, that's the person that keeps you or loses you. And if you have a bad experience with that dealer, you and 3 of your friends don't go back to that casino. So these frontline staff actually are the business. And so she was saying to me she believes that investing in them is so important. And she was saying being able to identify the different skills that these people have is also useful because some people are better suited to certain tasks than others. So even at the front line, to bring people in and know where they're best suited and where you need to develop them has really helped her to get them flying.
Fabulous.
So I think that's a really good place to put a full stop. But maybe just any final comments from you, Kevin, before we wrap?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit. I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been a lot of fun to engage with these sorts of questions. And you give me a lot of food for thought, a lot of things I think we need to play with as Odyssey, and hopefully we can find some of these answers that I haven't quite had in this session.
Well, thank you for your openness and for joining us with the podcast. It was really fascinating.
I'd just like to congratulate Odyssey and Everlex for taking the first pioneering steps in this adventure. We hope that Omnicor will partner with you in the future and walk some of the journey together.
Thanks, Hilton. I think we will.
Great.
Game-changing assessments, whatever you decide. Make sure you look behind the hype and check the science. Do the assessments provide relevant insights that will help with fair and objective recruitment decisions? If you like this episode, please subscribe and comment, and check out our website www.omnicor.co.za for our blog and previous episodes. A big thank you to William Uren, our producer.